Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to tonight's special committee of the whole. I have 6:31. Today is Tuesday, October 11th. With that, Kyle, if you could take a roll call.
Albright.
Present.
Gray.
Present.
Reed.
Here.
Steiner.
Here.
And Mayor Arnold is absent and excused, as are Alders, Motive, and Rolke.
Thank you. This meeting was properly noticed, so next up is to approve the agenda.
Alder Steiner will make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Alder Albright will second.
All right, I have a motion from Alder Steiner and a second from Alder Albright. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So tonight's meeting is to present some budget information and some details to the public about the budget and the budget process. So with that, Kyle has a presentation.
All right, thank you. For anyone that hasn't grabbed kind of the 8.5 by 14 sheet, this is sort of the budget in brief that's broken down. So that will be useful as we go through some of this. I'm going to try to talk through the slides as quickly as I can. It gets a little bit wonky at times, but if you have any questions, just let me know, and I can try to explain in a better way or add some more information if that helps. And then we'll go after that and see what kind of questions you might have or any adjustments that we know we might want to consider. So what we're going to cover as far as the workshop agenda, budget process and timeline, sort of, how we started and what our time frame is for our budget process, the budget terms and basics. A lot of you have probably heard some of this before, but it never hurts to get a refresher once or twice a year. Some of the state programs and restrictions that we have that really shape what we do and how we can do it. And then we'll talk about the proposed budget, some of the numbers and questions in a slightly different way than we talked about last Tuesday. So budget process and timeline, this is really small and there's a lot of things here. The point is to show that, since July, we've really been working on this budget, and hopefully on November 15th, we will walk away with budget approval, backup date being November 22nd. The reality of it is that the budget really never starts and it never stops. We're working on this all year long. We're either preparing for the next year's budget, or we're closing out last year's budget, or we're trying to stay within this year's budget with the challenges that we always have come up. And I think it's kind of worth noting that we get one chance to do this. You can always amend the budget during the year, but you're not going to bring in significant new revenue if you miscalculated or you didn't anticipate something. So it is sort of an important task to make sure that we use our best guesses and try to build something that is manageable and gives us the flexibility to kind of weather the storm throughout the year. Some budget terms and basics. We talk about budget book and the adopted budget. Budget book is the big thick thing that has all the lines with all the utilities and everything else in it. When we look at what the adopted budget is going to be, it's much simpler, and it's a one-page document that we'll be publishing in the paper. I think it has 8 revenue categories or classifications for the general fund, 6 expenditure categories, broad things like public safety, public works. Much different than what we use to build those numbers. This goes into great detail on everything from office supplies to salaries and benefits. This captures it all in a total form. The sheet that you have, the 8.5 by 14, budget in brief, is sort of a middle ground where it is more detailed than what the public notice will have, but it's much less detailed than the line-by-line utilities, pencils, stuff like that. So hopefully that provides some useful information as far as the different budget groups and how they've changed over the years and what the request is for 2023. The budget itself is comprised of the general fund and other funds. We have a lot of funds. We have over a dozen other funds that sometimes work as a subsidiary of the general fund. We transfer money out of the general fund to them, and other funds like the library receive tax levy revenue directly, and they operate independently of the city budget, but we include them as part of the overall budget packet. Then talking about property assessment, every property is assessed, and that's one of the ways that we allocate the property tax that each person receives is kind of a relative value. And we'll talk more about that process in the next couple slides. Just wanted to note that the manufacturing assessment is the one that's more specialized, and then the state takes care of most of the manufacturing assessments because it's a fairly unique and specialized process, kind of in a statewide basis. So when we talked about assessment, we talk about assessment ratio, and that plays with the next word or next term, which is equalized value. And the assessment ratio takes the value that the assessor puts on the properties and compares it to the value that the state puts on all the properties in the city. And the difference between the two becomes the assessment ratio. You want to be as close to 1 as you can be. That means that the assessed value matches the equalized value. You're right on what the state thinks you should be. If you get too far outside of that, you have to do a mandatory revaluation. Because of the kind of wild swings in property values, we're probably going to be looking at a revaluation here in the coming year or two. And we just did one about 2 years ago, and I think we're down to about 86% or so. So another one of the terms that we have in there is net new construction, and that's really one of the key terms that helps us determine what kind of budget increase we can expect in the next year. It takes the new construction that happened in the previous year and applies it, it goes on the levy limit worksheet and allows your levy to increase by that amount. We'll have a slide later on that shows kind of historically where we've been and where we've been the last couple of years, and there's a kind of a telling story, I think, in that. Mill rate is something that gets thrown around a lot. I think it's one of those that it makes it harder to understand sometimes by using it. But essentially, it's the amount of tax per dollar of assessed value. So when you talk mill rate, you're saying the number of mills would equal the amount of tax per $1,000. So if it's 7 mills, it's $7 per 1,000. That's, like I said, you'll hear that a lot. I prefer to just use numbers to multiply it out. So if you were looking at 7 mills, you'd be looking at 0.007, and you can do it that way as well. We talked a little bit about the assessment, and again, we did a revaluation a number of years ago, probably 2 years ago, and we heard a lot about how high the property values had jumped and how much their taxes were going to go up because their property value went up by 20%. So property values are related to the tax burden, but they're not directly related. It is how we determine how much of the share of taxes you get to pay, but if everyone goes up by the same exact amount, no one pays any additional taxes. This is a little hard to read, but over here, it's basically a community. It's $2.4 billion, and they haven't had a revaluation in a long time. They get a revaluation, and suddenly they're $3.4 billion. Well, if everyone increased by the same amount, the mill rate would change drastically. It would go from 17.43 down to 12.3. But because everyone went up at the same rate, you would collect the same exact amount, and you'd be paying the same amount as the homeowner, because everyone, again, increased at the same amount, so there was no change. If one person goes up more than the other, their tax bill would go up. If they go up less than the average, their tax bill would go down. So reassessment or revaluation by itself doesn't equal tax increases or decreases. It's all about how your property performs compared to everyone else's.
And I'd like to point out during our last valuation, the mill rate did go down as a result.
And then we talk about the tax bill, and we obviously as a city, we're collecting and issuing the tax bills, but we're collecting for a lot of other taxing jurisdictions. So when you pay your tax bill to the city of Columbus, not all of that money is going to the city of Columbus. In fact, most of it isn't. As you can see here, the city of Columbus is about 35%, and everyone else makes up the rest. It's the county government, the school district, and the tech school. So again, the majority of the taxes we collect are not for the city. Some of the state programs that we talk about quite a bit are the levy limits. You must have heard about levy limits by now. They've been around for a long time. They're becoming kind of increasingly difficult to work with. There's a few tools that they've built into the levy limits. Mostly, the primary one is the exception for general obligation debt. And that's something that we've pursued that, and we have some of that exception built in. You can also have emergency expenses or expenses related to an intergovernmental cooperation agreement. Those can be reduced or actually added to your levy so that you have more room on your levy. But those are the kind of limited tools that we have. Again, primarily the ones that we're working with are the debt coverage, and that by itself is, limited as well as how much we can borrow, and it's sort of a point of diminishing returns. If you have to use the exemption to borrow money, you're paying more for the money that you could have just levied, but that's the system that we're working within. Covered services is something that I think is we've actually talked about this quite a bit in the city of Columbus. There's a number of services that are covered that you can't just go ahead and add a fee without a corresponding reduction in your levy. Street sweeping, snow plowing, garbage collection, and most importantly, stormwater. This is the reason that we couldn't just do the stormwater utility and start collecting it without taking the levy penalty. They base it on the 2013 year, and that happened to be a year where we had the Gateway project and we had a lot of stormwater expenses. So we would have to collect more than $150,000 before we would actually begin to see a net benefit of additional revenue. So those are services that, if they were covered by the tax levy, we have no ability to, without a referendum, we have no ability to collect those fees without taking the penalty. Expenditure restraint, actually for once, the expenditure restraint isn't a bad, it's not a bad year for expenditure restraint. I think we're at 7.9% expenditure restraint because inflation was 7.7. Unfortunately, that means our growth was 0.2. But it is something that for this year, we do not have to worry about. We're well within the expenditure restraint limits, and that does provide us some needed revenue on the backside of that to make sure that we stay within those. Debt limit ratio, obviously we have the 5% equalized value that we can't go over, and there'll be a chart just in a little bit that kind of shows you where we've been compared to our limit. The state limit is 5% of our equalized value. We want to be 65% of that by internal policy, so really that boils down to 3.25% of our equalized value is open to us by our policy to borrow. So as we talked about the 2023 budget, the 2022 tax bill, the goals that the council had were pretty straightforward. We wanted to focus this year on staff compensation, making sure that wages and benefits were supported, as well as maintaining the amenities that make the community what it is. Things that might not have an obvious payback, but they, again, support the well-being of the community, the parks, the recreation, senior center, library, things like that. So in the budget, the general fund budget is currently up about $36,000. The tax levy overall is up significantly, 5.3%, over $183,000. Most of that is being kind of buffered by the retirement of TIF District 3. So we got just about 5.3% of the value returned to the levy when TIF 3 retired. So between that and our the little bit of growth that we have, that $183,000 is buffered pretty well so that there shouldn't, at this point, it doesn't appear there's going to be a significant impact on the mill rate. It should stay pretty steady. We're still working to get the final assessed value so that we know exactly what that's going to be. But it appears to be in a pretty modest location right now. Again, expenditure restraint, we're looking at a limit of 7.9. With that 7.7% inflation, we're at 5.3. So we have a significant amount of room between the expenditure restraint cap and where we are. Some new funds and new initiatives that we've built into the 2023 budget. Stormwater, obviously that's been an issue for a long time. And what we've done with stormwater is removed it from the general fund, and it's its own standalone utility fund right now. The only funding for that right now is through the property tax levy, but what that will allow it to do is that all of the expenditures that we have will be tracked, so we'll get a good accounting for the revenue we bring in, the expenditures we have, but everything we don't spend will stay within the fund balance and increase that over time, allowing us to do bigger projects over time. We've also moved the sidewalks out of the general fund and moved that into the capital fund. Again, trying to build a sustainable way to handle sidewalks. So in the future, that will be handled. The money that comes back from people paying back their sidewalk assessments will stay in the capital improvement fund and will be earmarked to go back into future sidewalk improvements. It's going to be a slow climb, but over time that will build up momentum and we'll be able to get through the city much quicker. We also had moving the planning director from the CDA budget. That's now in the general fund, and the CDA budget's been shrunk significantly to handle just a portion of the economic development salary. And then finally, we established an employee engagement account this year so that we can put money towards employee recognition, employee celebrations, building the culture of the community and that we have at work here. And I think that's going to be exciting, and hopefully we can build on that, doing things that make people view the city as a place that they would really like to come work and maybe work here more than other places. There's a few things we know that are changing from the budget that you received on last Tuesday. We did get the transportation aids finally. Unfortunately, ours are down about $5,600, so we have to kind of tweak the budget a little bit to accommodate that. And then there's some minor formula tweaks that we need to make on 2 or 3 salary lines that were identified late last week. But all changes are going to be very minor, and we're looking at any changes being, about 0.2% of the overall budget. So we're really down to the fine tuning at this point. So again, I know that we've talked about this, but the things that we maintained or increased in next year's budget, emergency services was one of the primary ones. That was an increase of over $60,000 between police, fire, and EMS. Employee benefits was something that we made sure that we maintained committed to, even with some significant health insurance increases that we'll talk about. Road maintenance is increased again. Sidewalk repair and replacement is increased again. Tree removals are also increased. And we've maintained the amenities for the aquatic center, the library, senior center, recreation. And then again, also funded the stormwater repair and maintenance. So some of the numbers that, as we talked through that, we talked about health insurance. So we had about a 10% increase in health insurance. The increase that we actually had was $30,550. That wasn't 10% of last year's number, but we had some changes in staffing where different people that were maybe on family coverage are now single coverage. So the numbers tweaked a little bit, but essentially it's costing us about $30,000 more to provide the same health insurance that we provided for 2022. On the employee side, their contribution also is going up by that 10%. So, what they contribute out of their paycheck will also be increasing by that amount. And then inflation, it's something that we're seeing. It has a budget impact, it has an operational impact, but services, parts, equipment, you can't get contractors. We just had today a very significant a generator at a significant operation have a problem, and they can get us a part in 40 days. And we can't wait 40 days for that. So we're, working through alternate solutions. But, everything from fuel to the parts is costing more. And that's hurting this year's budget, and it's hurting next year's budget. And we don't even necessarily, know how to accommodate that because you don't know how in what ways it's going to be. But just know it's going to put strain on the department heads as they try to balance their budget through the year. And again, the wages, we're accommodating a general wage increase of 3.5%. There are some targeted adjustments in there, and among all funds, the salary increases are about $83,000. But again, that's broken down among different funds. The library would have their increases, so this is sort of a conglomeration of all of the funds. Some pretty charts. Here's our net new construction. You can see these are in millions of dollars, basically. Here's 5 million, 10 million. So starting in 2016, we had a relatively steady range of between 6 and 9 million. We had a couple years about 7.5 million. I believe it was from in 2019. We had a significant $21 million increase. When you look after 2020, we're down to a million. Here's 1.7. We haven't recovered that same volume of new construction that we've had previously, and I think that's a combination of some reduction in planned building, but also I think the reality that we're really constricted on lots and available parcels to develop something on. There are a few commercial parcels that are developing now or near development, but on the residential side, it's nearly non-existent at this point. And so until that returns, it's going to be hard to find a sustainable way to get enough net new construction to really keep the funding on a roll so that we don't have to slowly increase the amount of taxes that the existing people pay or start cutting things that people enjoy and make them want to be here. When we talk about the actual debt versus allowable debt, you can see back in 2015, we were at a high of our allowable debt. We were at 54.8% of the state limit. And then you can see it kind of trending down from 2018 on to last year being at 36.1%. We did do a borrowing this year, but we're still going to be very modest in our utilization of debt. So we're in a very good position that way. All right, when we talk about the general fund budget, we talked about where the general fund budget goes. We do a lot of things with the general fund. That's the primary receiver of the property tax levy. You can see there's a big chunk for administration, public works, police department, fire department. Here is the quality of life amenities, about 13%. And then there's a bunch of very minor things, municipal court, historic preservation, emergency management. But between the emergency services and public works, you're looking at over 60% of the budget. And again, I think that goes back to the core function of our budget is to provide the basic services of a government. We're keeping the streets going, we're collecting the taxes, running elections, keeping the city safe, fighting fires, providing ambulance service. But after that, it gets to be fairly modest as far as the amount of money that goes to other things like the quality of life and economic development. But that is kind of the nature of you do the important stuff that you have to do first, and then you figure out what you can do with the rest. So for the total tax bill, this is not the general fund, now we're talking the overall tax bill. You can see the general fund is about 59.6%. The aquatic center is 3.2%. Debt service is the other large expenditure at 23.8%, and the library is 8%. But a lot of the general fund and the debt service end up being nearly 85% of the budget. The next page actually has the numbers that we dedicate to it. So when you look at what that means in budget numbers, the general fund is receiving property tax dollars in the amount of over $2 million. But then as you look at some of the other items, the aquatic center, $114,000, cemetery, $54,000. Obviously debt service again being a large contributor to the expenses. Library is $290,000, and municipal court in its partial year, we expect it the expenses to be about $25,000. And again, now we have stormwater broken out as its separate account. So this is sort of how your tax bill, the things that the actual property taxes pay for. Now, this isn't the overall budget. We obviously collect a lot of fees. There's a lot of intergovernmental revenue that we collect that funds the general fund. The Aquatic Center takes in memberships and other revenue that helps offset the expenses. But so this is just when you get your tax bill, the money that we're allocating each year or this next year off of the property tax revenue. So I know I've heard it over time that this is, a very expensive place to live. I've heard people say it's the most expensive place they've ever heard of. Well, if you look at the equalized tax rate, and again, when we talk about equalized, what we're saying is that the state says, here's your value, and it doesn't then, we're not saying that our ratio is 86% and someone else's is 105. So this takes basically the equalized tax rate minus the tax increment districts and divides the local property tax levy by it. And you can see we're not the lowest. Mayville and Sun Prairie are lower than us. Waterloo is a little bit higher. Poinette, Portage, Horicon, and Beaver Dam are also higher. And every community has their own story when it comes to their property tax rate. Everyone provides a little bit different services. They have a different history of how they got to where they are. So by itself, this doesn't mean that the ones that are lower are better and the ones that are higher are worse. That's not what it means. I think it means that as you look at it, we're not out of the ballpark on the mill rates that you see. We're, I would say, fairly average, maybe a little below average, as far as the amount of taxes we collect based on the equalized value. I think it's a good place to be. We're not, again, at the top and we're not at the bottom. But I do think it shows that what we've done over the years has built up something that is sustainable for the taxpayer. And there's still some room for some flexibility there if we need it. So that's all I had that I wanted to provide as kind of the context and the background for the process. And I guess at this point, if there's any questions or anything else you wanted covered.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Did anyone on council have a question or comment? I know we've all heard this information a few times before.
Yeah. I would be interested to see if there's any residents that have anything to ask.
Would the rest of council like to
Yeah.
come up? All right. Is there anyone that would like to speak or anyone that has a question in the audience? Not really seeing people in the audience that haven't heard all this information before. Go ahead and come up to the podium. It's the little face with the three. There you go.
There we go.
He turned it on for you.
Thanks. Henry Elling, 650 South Charles Street. I don't know if it's going to be an easy number or not, Kyle, but I saw on the last sheet that you had the $862,000 for debt service for next year. I was wondering, in real numbers, not in percentage, is that a fairly constant number, or has that been going down over time?
I think the contribution to debt service has been going up over time. We had some funds previously, like the Gateway Fund, that were deferring some of our debt service expenditures, but actually from 2001 to 2023, 2021 was $786,000, 2022 is $803,000, and next year is $862,000 as we're taking on two new debt issues, one a state trust fund loan, and then the other one the GO bond. Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Anyone else, any questions or comments? Seeing none. Go ahead, Trish.
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you for all of the visuals. I really enjoyed the graph charts, and it was super helpful, and I don't think I'd ever seen the equalized tax rate comparables of the different local cities, so thank you.
Thank you, Alder Reed. Yeah, the big thing with that is, honestly, that number in and of itself is almost irrelevant because you have to look at property tax values. Like that's going by equalized tax rate, so it's kind of showing like Beaver Dam's mill rate might be a lot higher than ours, but the average home is worth far less than the home here. So it's really not a super relevant number, to be honest.
I just wanted to say thank you. Everything that you had in your PowerPoint is what I was looking for, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you so much, Kyle. I know this was a lot of work for you to put together for everyone, and I appreciate you doing it for us. So with that, if there's nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Reed will second.
I have a motion from Alder Albright and a second from Alder Reed to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned. Does anyone need a break before we go into basically closed session?
No, I don't.
No? Okay. All right, then, next up, I have 7:02. Today is Tuesday, October 11th. I would like to welcome everyone to the Columbus Common Council regular meeting agenda for our special meeting. And with that, if Kyle could take a roll call.
Albright.
Present.
Thank you. Gray.
Present.
Reed.
Here.
Steiner.
Here.
And Mayor Arnold and Alders Motif and Rolke are absent and excused.
Thank you very much. This meeting was, of course, properly noticed. Next up on the agenda is to approve the agenda.
Alder Steiner will make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Alder Albright will second.
I have a motion from Alder Steiner and a second from Alder Albright. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, agenda is approved. Any citizen comments? Did you have?
I'm just wondering if you do intend to come back and take possible action tonight or not, since there's only 4.
We may come back and take possible action after our closed session, yes.
Okay.
All right. And then next up on the agenda is to convene to closed session per 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investment of public funds, or conducting other public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, specifically to discuss the potential sale of a property in the city of Columbus. I'll take a motion.
Alder Albright will make a motion to go to closed session.
Alder Steiner will second.
All right, I have a motion from Alder Albright and a second from Alder Steiner to convene to closed session per 19.851E. Could you take a roll call for us, Kyle?
Albright.
Present.
Gray.
Aye.
Reed.
Aye.
Steiner.
Aye.
All right. We will be temporarily convening to closed session and reconvening shortly. Thank you, everyone.
I apologize.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Next up on the agenda is to adjourn. I'll take a motion.
Alder Albright will make a motion to adjourn.
Reed seconds.
I have a motion from Alder Albright and a second from Alder Reed. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you.